It begins quietly. Two people, deeply connected, holding hands, sharing life, but not touching in that way anymore. No kisses that linger. No nights tangled in each other's arms. No sparks in the dark. For some, this is simply how life evolves. For others, it feels like something precious has slipped away. The question rises, unspoken but sharp. Can love survive without physical intimacy? We grow up hearing that touch is a language of love, that the brush of fingertips, the weight of an embrace, the meeting of lips, these are the ways we affirm. I see you, I want you, I choose you. So when that touch disappears, what does it mean? Does the relationship enter a countdown toward its end? Or can it transform into something just as profound, maybe even deeper without it? First, let's strip away assumptions. Physical intimacy isn't just sex. It's the countless, subtle ways we bridge the physical gap between two bodies. A forehead kiss before leaving for work. A thumb tracing lazy circles on a wrist. A hug that lasts longer than 3 seconds. Psychologists say these micro moments of contact release oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, calming our nervous system, lowering stress, and deepening connection. So yes, physical closeness has chemistry on its side. But here's the truth. Couples can and do survive without it. The real question is, under what conditions? There are marriages that thrive without sexual contact for years, sometimes decades. There are friendships that evolve into life partnerships, bonded by loyalty and shared purpose, not by physical touch. And there are couples who choose abstinence, whether for religious, health, or personal reasons, and still describe themselves as deeply in love. So survival is possible, but the key lies in what replaces physical intimacy when it fades or disappears. Think of intimacy as a currency. When touch is no longer exchanged, something else must take its place to keep the emotional bank account full. That something might be emotional intimacy, raw, unfiltered conversations at 2 a.m. It might be intellectual intimacy, growing and learning together, feeding each other's minds. It might be spiritual intimacy, aligning values, faith, or life missions so closely that the bond feels unbreakable. Without a replacement currency, the relationship risks going emotionally bankrupt. But let's not romanticize too quickly. For many people, lack of physical intimacy is not neutral. It hurts. It can feel like rejection, like being invisible in your own relationship. You might still share a home, laugh over dinner, plan vacations, but at night you lie side by side, feeling miles apart. The ache isn't about sex itself, it's about what sex represents. Desire, affirmation, being chosen again and again. When that affirmation disappears, self-doubt creeps in. Am I still attractive? Do they still want me? Are they staying for love or just habit? If you've felt this, you're not alone. A 2020 survey from the Kinsey Institute found that nearly 1 in 5 couples report having sex less than once a month, and many of those couples describe feeling more like roommates than lovers. This isn't always because love has faded. Sometimes it's medical, chronic pain, hormonal changes, post-surgery recovery. Sometimes it's psychological, depression, anxiety, trauma. Sometimes it's circumstantial, exhaustion from parenting, financial stress, or simply the grind of life. But in all cases, the absence of intimacy changes the emotional weather of a relationship. The air feels colder, the distance wider. So can the relationship survive? The short answer, yes. The long answer, only if both partners understand what's being lost and actively work to replace or redefine it. I once spoke with a couple, married for 32 years, who hadn't been physically intimate for more than a decade. The husband had a medical condition that made intercourse painful. The wife missed that part of their life deeply at first. But instead of letting the absence hollow out their marriage, they redefined closeness. They started cooking together every night. They held hands on walks. They wrote each other love letters and left them under pillows. They created Sunday mornings, a ritual where they had lie in bed, drink coffee, and talk about life for hours. They found ways to touch each other's hearts, even when they couldn't touch each other's bodies. But not all stories end that way. Some couples let the absence of touch fester in silence. One partner quietly resents the other. The other feels pressured or blamed. Conversations about it turn into fights or worse. They don't happen at all. In these relationships, emotional distance grows until even non-physical intimacy becomes strained. And without any form of intimacy, physical, emotional, or otherwise, love struggles to survive. That's why survival depends on three things. Mutual understanding. Both partners need to acknowledge the absence of physical intimacy and agree on whether it's a temporary phase, a permanent reality, or something they want to work on. Alternative connection. You must find other ways to feel desired, loved, and valued. This might mean deepening conversation, building rituals, or expressing affection through acts of service or shared experiences. Emotional safety. Without physical reassurance, words and actions must carry more weight. Both people need to feel they can speak openly about needs and boundaries without fear of judgment. Because here's the truth. Physical intimacy can be one of the most beautiful parts of a relationship, but it's not the only thread holding two people together. Yes, it's a thread that often carries warmth, security, and passion. But the strongest relationships are woven from many threads: trust, respect, curiosity, forgiveness, laughter. When one thread frays, the others must be reinforced. So can a relationship survive without physical intimacy? Yes, but it won't survive by accident. It will survive because both people choose to show up, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. It will survive because they understand that love is not just what happens in the bedroom, but in the moments of care, connection, and commitment that happen everywhere else. And perhaps most importantly, it will survive because they decide that intimacy, in whatever form it takes, is worth protecting. To truly understand whether love can survive without touch, we have to go deeper into the human brain itself. Because intimacy isn't just about feelings, it's about biology. When two people kiss, hug, or even hold hands, their bodies trigger a chemical cocktail. Oxytocin for bonding, dopamine for pleasure, serotonin for mood regulation. These aren't just romantic extras, they're evolutionary survival tools. For thousands of years, touch meant safety, connection, and reassurance that we were not alone in the wild. So when physical intimacy fades, the brain loses one of its oldest sources of reassurance. And it will notice. This is why some people describe the absence of intimacy like a quiet hunger. They may have love, commitment, and shared history, yet something still aches. It's not weakness, it's wiring. But wiring can be rewired. Not erased, but redirected. Consider a story from an online forum where a woman described her 18-year marriage. Her husband had suffered an injury that made intimacy impossible. At first, she felt lonely in ways she couldn't admit, but over time, they found a different rhythm. They became each other's biggest fans, cheering each other's goals, surprising each other with small gestures, finding joy in shared adventures. She said, "I realized I didn't need sex to feel loved. I needed presence." Presence, the act of showing up fully, can become its own form of intimacy. But let's be honest, not everyone can make that shift. For some, physical touch is their primary love language. Without it, they feel unloved, no matter how much emotional support they receive. Gary Chapman, author of The 5 Love Languages, explains that if your partner's main love language is physical touch, removing it can feel like taking away their native tongue. You can still speak to them in other ways: acts of service, quality time, gifts, words of affirmation, but it will never hit the same emotional depth. So survival in these cases becomes a negotiation between needs and realities. If one partner can't or chooses not to engage physically, the other must decide whether emotional connection alone is enough. And here lies one of the most challenging truths. Love and compatibility are not the same thing. You can love someone deeply, yet still struggle to thrive in the relationship they can offer you. Many couples find themselves in this quiet crossroads. They don't want to leave. They don't want to hurt each other. But in the silence, resentment grows until the relationship becomes more about avoiding pain than creating joy. Some try open relationships, seeking physical intimacy elsewhere while preserving emotional intimacy at home. Others accept the absence as the cost of keeping the person they love most. And some simply drift away. But here's a perspective shift. What if physical intimacy isn't gone, but simply different? Intimacy is not a single act. It's a spectrum from the obvious to the subtle. A hand on the small of the back, brushing a partner's hair behind their ear, sitting close enough that your knees touch. These moments might not lead to sex, but they still speak the language of connection. They still tell the brain, you are wanted, you are safe. Couples who survive and even thrive without sexual intimacy often lean hard into these smaller physical gestures. They create rituals of touch that are unconnected to pressure or expectation. A kiss on the forehead at bedtime, holding hands while watching TV, dancing slowly in the kitchen on a Tuesday night. Because in the end, intimacy is not always about intensity. Sometimes it's about consistency. Research from the University of California found that non-sexual touch can still trigger oxytocin release, lower blood pressure, and reduce feelings of loneliness. So even when sexual intimacy is off the table, the body can still reap the benefits of connection if partners are intentional about it. But here's the catch. When intimacy disappears abruptly due to conflict, betrayal, or emotional withdrawal, the impact is far harsher. In these cases, touch is not just absent, it's withheld, and withheld touch often feels like punishment. One man described it as being thirsty in front of a glass of water I'm not allowed to drink. That kind of deprivation breeds not adaptation, but bitterness. It sends the unspoken message, you are not worthy of my affection, and that message, over time, can poison even the strongest bonds. This is why communication is non-negotiable. If physical intimacy fades, you have to talk about it not in accusations, but in curiosity. Ask, how do you feel about our physical closeness? Is it enough for you? Is something making it hard to connect that way? And then listen. Not to reply, not to defend, but to understand. In another case, a couple in their late 40s found their intimacy fading without either of them realizing why. It turned out the wife was experiencing early menopause, which made physical touch uncomfortable, but she hadn't told her husband out of embarrassment. He assumed she had lost attraction to him. That silent misunderstanding could have ended them. But once it was out in the open, they found ways to adapt, focusing on emotional closeness, learning new forms of touch that didn't cause discomfort, and above all, keeping communication alive. The truth is, physical intimacy is important, but it is not the single measure of love's survival. What matters more is whether partners can replace lost forms of connection with new ones without letting resentment fill the gaps. And perhaps that's the hidden beauty here. When touch fades, love is forced to prove itself in other ways. It must move beyond instinct into intention, beyond passion into patience. Maybe, just maybe, it's in the absence of the easy things that we learn to master the hard ones. Listening without judgment, staying when it's inconvenient, choosing each other when the world makes it easier not to. And that too is intimacy, even if it looks nothing like the kind we first imagined. When people ask if a relationship can survive without physical intimacy, what they're really asking is, can love survive without the physical proof of it? For many, that proof is the comfort of a hand in the dark, a kiss at the kitchen counter, a slow Sunday morning tangled in each other's arms. Without it, they feel a quiet gap, a question left unanswered. But survival is not the same as fulfillment. Some couples survive without intimacy because they choose to redirect their focus entirely. They pour their energy into shared projects, mutual goals, raising children, building businesses, or traveling the world together. Their connection becomes less about bodies and more about legacies. This can work, but it's a delicate balance. Because when you replace one form of connection with another, you must ensure it doesn't become avoidance. In long-term studies of couples over decades, researchers found a striking pattern. Couples who lost physical intimacy but remained happy were not simply making do. They were actively creating new bonds. Date nights, open laughter, new hobbies, even learning something difficult together, like a language or an instrument. Why does this matter? Because shared growth triggers the same kind of bonding chemicals that intimacy does. The brain doesn't know you're not touching it, knows you're connected. But what about when one partner still craves that touch? What happens when only one is satisfied with the change? That's when the question becomes not can we survive, but can we both be happy in the same reality? This is the moment where many relationships fracture, not from anger, not from betrayal, but from a slow, unspoken erosion of needs. When one partner feels unwanted, even if the other still loves them, the mind begins to rewrite the story. They start wondering, is it me? Have I lost my appeal? Have I done something wrong? And when those questions go unanswered, self-worth starts to bleed away. One man in his 50s described it like this. We still said, I love you every day, but without her touch, I didn't believe it anymore. That's the danger of neglecting intimacy. Without addressing it, the meaning of love shifts, even if the feelings haven't. So how do couples bridge this gap when one needs more physical closeness than the other can give? Step 1, honesty. Brutal, unfiltered honesty. Not in a way that shames the other person, but in a way that shines a light on the reality neither of you want to admit. Step 2, curiosity. If intimacy is missing, you must ask why. Is it medical, emotional, psychological, situational? The why determines the how of moving forward. Step 3, creativity. If traditional intimacy isn't possible, what are the alternatives? Massage, cuddling without sexual pressure, dancing, long embraces, any act that allows physical closeness without crossing into discomfort for either person. I think of Sarah and Daniel, who had been together for 15 years when Daniel's health began to decline. He could no longer engage in the same physical closeness they once enjoyed. At first, Sarah tried to bury her frustration, telling herself that love was enough, but she found herself pulling away emotionally, almost without realizing it. Finally, Daniel brought it up. I feel like you're slipping away, he said. They started something simple, holding hands during every conversation. No matter what they were discussing, no matter how stressed they were, they would reach for each other. It became a ritual, a small, stubborn act of closeness. It didn't replace everything, but it changed the way they felt about each other. This isn't just sentimental, it's neurological. Physical contact, even something as small as holding hands, activates the vagus nerve, which calms the body and deepens emotional safety. And when people feel safe, they're more open, more affectionate, and more trusting. In other words, touch, even minimal, keeps the emotional bridge intact. When there's no touch at all, the emotional bridge can weaken, not always collapse, but strain. And in that strain, tiny cracks appear, irritations feel sharper, misunderstandings last longer, forgiveness takes more effort. Some relationships can endure that, but many will not. So the real question might not be, can love survive without physical intimacy? The real question might be, do both partners want to survive that way? Because survival without joy is endurance, and endurance alone is not the same as a thriving relationship. Some couples will choose to adapt, finding new ways to feel connected. Some will grieve what they've lost and then discover a deeper form of partnership they never knew was possible. And some will accept that physical intimacy matters too much to them to live without it. There's no single right answer, only the one that allows both people to look at each other years from now and still say, I chose you fully. When intimacy fades, it doesn't happen in a single moment. It's not a slammed door or a shouted no. It's a gradual fading, so subtle you don't notice it until you feel the emptiness it leaves behind. At first you explain it away. We're just tired. It's been a busy week. We'll make time soon. But soon those weeks become months, and the silence in that part of your relationship starts to feel like the new normal. Ain't it? What many people underestimate is that intimacy is a habit. And like any habit, once it's lost, it's harder to rebuild. The body forgets the rhythm, the mind loses the reflex. Touch becomes something you think about instead of something you instinctively do. In some couples, this shift feels peaceful, a quiet companionship where emotional intimacy takes center stage. But in others, the absence feels like an unspoken rejection, an unanswered question that keeps echoing. Psychologists studying long-term couples often find that intimacy and communication work in a loop. The more physically connected a couple is, the easier it becomes to talk about difficult topics. The more emotionally connected they are, the more natural physical closeness feels. When one side of that loop disappears, the other starts to strain. Without intimacy, communication often becomes purely logistical. Did you pay the bill? Who's picking up the kids? What's for dinner? Life becomes a list of tasks instead of a shared emotional space. Let's step into the life of two people, Claire and Marcus. When they first met, their relationship was electric. They couldn't keep their hands off each other. But after a decade, life got complicated. Children, careers, aging parents. Neither of them noticed the slow fade. Until one night, Claire realized it had been over a year since they'd been physically intimate. When she brought it up, Marcus looked away. He loved her deeply, he truly did, but the spark was gone for him. Not because of her, but because he had simply lost that drive. This is where so many couples arrive, a crossroads where love is still present, but desire has shifted. It's a painful place because both people can feel right in their own truth, and yet both can feel equally hurt by the others. So how do you move forward when the definition of love itself is split in two? First, you have to dismantle one of the biggest myths in relationships. That physical intimacy is a bonus, or an extra, rather than a core pillar. In truth, for many people, physical intimacy is how love speaks. It's not about lust, it's about reassurance, safety, validation. Without it, some feel adrift, even if their partner still says, "I love you" every day. Second, you have to understand that not everyone's needs are equal. One person may feel completely fulfilled without touch. The other may feel starved without it. Neither is wrong, but if those needs don't overlap, the relationship requires deliberate adaptation. Adaptation can take many forms. Scheduling moments of closeness, even if it feels unromantic at first. Creating rituals, a hug every morning before leaving for work, a kiss before sleep. Exploring new ways of intimacy that don't trigger discomfort for the lower desire partner. It's not about forcing passion. It's about building a bridge where both can stand without resentment. But here's the hard truth. Adaptation only works if both people want to adapt. If one partner agrees out of guilt or fear of losing the other, the intimacy becomes a chore. And when intimacy feels like a chore, it erodes rather than strengthens the bond. I once interviewed a woman named Helena. She had been with her partner for 20 years, and for the last 10, there had been no physical intimacy at all. She told me she stayed because they shared a life, a home, and deep companionship. But when I asked her if she was happy, she paused. Then she said, "I'm fine, but I don't feel alive anymore." Her partner, on the other hand, was perfectly content. He couldn't understand why she seemed restless. To him, their love was stronger than ever. To her, it was like living in a house without warmth, shelter, without heat. And this is the danger zone when love is defined so differently that one person is thriving while the other is quietly wilting. Neuroscience tells us that physical intimacy is a primal form of connection. When we touch, our bodies release oxytocin, a hormone that bonds us, lowers stress, and reinforces trust. Without it, our nervous systems slowly recalibrate. We become more self-contained. We stop reaching out. This is why some couples who lose intimacy eventually feel more like roommates than lovers. But this isn't a death sentence for a relationship. Some couples rediscover intimacy after years of absence and on. It often begins with one brave conversation, a conversation that strips away pride and replaces it with vulnerability. It's sitting across from the person you've shared a life with and saying, "I miss you. I don't want us to just be okay. I want us to be us again." And sometimes that's enough to spark curiosity. To make two people wonder, what if we could find our way back? Because in the end, intimacy isn't only about bodies. It's about reminding each other that you still see, still choose, and still reach for the person you love. When we talk about intimacy, most people picture the physical side: first kisses, touches, shared warmth beneath a blanket. But intimacy is far more layered than that. It's in the way someone looks at you and really sees you. It's in the quiet understanding between words, in the comfort of knowing you can be your most unguarded self. And yet in romantic relationships, physical intimacy often acts as the gateway to these other forms. It's the spark that lights the fire, the thread that ties together the emotional and the physical. When that thread snaps, some couples are able to weave a new one using trust, shared values, and emotional vulnerability. Others find the fabric of their bond slowly fraying. Why? Because physical intimacy is not just a luxury. It is, for many people, a form of love language. Just as some partners crave words of affirmation or acts of service, others need the reassurance of touch. The trouble is, when physical intimacy disappears, the partner who craves it often interprets its absence as a change in love itself. I must not be attractive anymore. They must not love me the way they used to. Maybe they're getting it somewhere else. These thoughts take root quietly, like weeds in a garden. And unless they're addressed, they choke out trust. Take David and Priya. They were deeply in love, and still are. But after Priya experienced a traumatic childbirth, her relationship with her own body changed. Touch no longer felt safe. In fact, it triggered anxiety. David didn't want to pressure her, so he stopped initiating. But instead of feeling respected, Priya noticed him becoming distant. And David, though he understood her pain, began feeling unwanted. Months turned into years, and their conversations shifted from dreams and desires to chores and schedules. Or they had become partners in logistics, but strangers in intimacy. It wasn't that they didn't love each other, it was that the love they shared no longer had a physical expression. Here's something worth remembering. When intimacy fades, it's rarely the result of one single decision. It's a chain reaction of tiny moments: fatigue, stress, miscommunication, hurt feelings that pile up until the very idea of closeness feels foreign. And yet, rebuilding it is possible. But it requires courage, patience, and most importantly, honest dialogue. If you are in a relationship without physical intimacy, the first step is to understand why. Not to assign blame, but to uncover the truth. Is it physical and illness, chronic pain, hormonal changes? Is it emotional resentment, past trauma, unspoken conflict? Or is it relational, a loss of attraction, mismatched desires, or simply growing apart? You cannot fix what you will not name. The second step is to agree on what survival looks like. Can you both feel satisfied without touch? Or does one of you need it as part of feeling loved? This is where many couples realize they've been living with completely different definitions of love. One partner believes that sharing life, a home, and memories is enough. The other feels that without physical intimacy, the relationship is incomplete. Neither is wrong, but the difference is significant. For a relationship to survive without physical intimacy, both partners must find fulfillment in other forms of connection: emotional intimacy, intellectual compatibility, spiritual alignment, shared purpose. But here's the challenge. If one partner is sacrificing a core need just to keep the relationship alive, it may survive, but it will not thrive. I once spoke to a man named Elias, married for 35 years. He and his wife had not been intimate for the last 15. When I asked him how he managed, he smiled and said, "I learned to stop expecting. I focused on what we do have: laughter, loyalty, friendship. But if I'm honest, I still miss it every day." His wife, on the other hand, felt their love was stronger than ever. "We're past that stage," she said. "We have something deeper now." They were living in the same relationship, but experiencing two entirely different realities. And this is what makes the question, Can a relationship survive without physical intimacy? So complex. It's not just about whether it can survive. It's about whether both people can feel fully alive within it. Love can survive on friendship. It can survive on loyalty. It can even survive on shared memories and mutual respect. But for many, love without touch feels like music without melody. It still exists, but something essential has gone quiet. When we strip relationships down to their essentials, what remains? Some will say love, others will say trust, and a few will say connection. But connection is a wide word. It can be a shared joke, a knowing glance, or the way you instinctively reach for each other's hands. It can also be the quiet trust that your partner will be there, even when the days are heavy and the nights are long. But what happens when that connection is tested not by betrayal or absence, but by the slow erosion of physical closeness? There's a truth we must face. Physical intimacy is often tied to identity. We use touch to say, "I'm here," to reinforce "I choose you," and sometimes even to reassure ourselves, "I am wanted." When touch disappears, some people adapt. They redirect their sense of worth into other areas: careers, hobbies, friendships. They find fulfillment elsewhere, believing that love can remain intact without physical reinforcement. But others begin to unravel inside. They may not say it out loud. They may even convince themselves they are fine. But deep down, a need is quietly going unmet. And unmet needs have a way of resurfacing. They don't vanish. They wait. They wait for moments of vulnerability, an argument, a lonely night, an opportunity to feel desired again, and that's when the cracks in the relationship begin to show. Consider the story of Claire and Mateo. For the first 5 years of their marriage, they were inseparable. But when Mateo's work became more demanding, stress began to consume him. Late nights at the office turned into early mornings at the desk. Conversations shrank down to practical updates. Touch became rare, not because they had stopped loving each other, but because there was no energy left for intimacy. Claire missed the little gestures: a kiss in the kitchen, a hand on her back when they walked together, the unspoken closeness of falling asleep intertwined. At first, she told herself it was temporary, but as months passed, she began to feel invisible. When she finally spoke up, Mateo was shocked. He thought they were doing fine. He didn't realize that for her, physical intimacy wasn't a bonus, it was proof of love. This is the reality for many couples. One partner can live without it, while the other sees its absence as the beginning of emotional distance. So can a relationship truly survive without physical intimacy? Yes, but only when both partners redefine what intimacy means to them. If one partner still places high value on physical closeness and the other has no desire for it, survival turns into compromise, and compromise, in this case, can easily slide into quiet resentment. To bridge this gap, couples must engage in radical honesty. That means talking not just about the mechanics of intimacy, but about the meaning of it. Ask Topo, what does touch represent to you? When it's missing, how do you feel? What can we do to feel close, even if physical intimacy isn't part of it right now? These are not easy questions, but without them, the silence grows louder. And here's the hard truth. Intimacy is a living thing. It requires attention, care, and intention. It doesn't flourish when it's left to chance. Research shows that physical touch releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, and reduces cortisol, the stress hormone. It builds trust on a neurological level. Without it, partners may still love each other, but their bodies stop sending those subtle signals of safety and connection. This doesn't mean every couple without physical intimacy is doomed, but it does mean they must actively find other ways to trigger that sense of connection: shared rituals, deep conversations, laughter, acts of service. Think of it like a garden. If one kind of plant can no longer grow, you must plant others that can still feed you. But if you let the soil go untended, nothing will thrive. I once met a woman named Zara who had been in a touchless marriage for over a decade. When I asked her how she stayed, she said, "I stopped thinking about what was missing and started counting what was still here." Her husband was kind, reliable, and made her laugh every day. But later she admitted something softly. Sometimes I still dream about being held. That's the part we must acknowledge, but survival doesn't always mean fulfillment. A relationship can endure without physical intimacy if the bond is strong in other ways. But endurance is not the same as joy. And when love is reduced to endurance, it risks becoming something that feels more like a contract than a connection. The absence of physical intimacy doesn't just remove a physical act. It rewrites the unspoken language between two people. Touch is its own dialect. A brush of the hand can mean, I missed you. A playful nudge can mean, I see you. And a long, lingering embrace can mean, you matter to me. When that language disappears, couples often begin speaking less in every sense of the word. Not because they don't care, but because the pathways they once used to show care have quietly closed. Let's be clear, not all relationships place equal weight on physical closeness. Some are sustained almost entirely by intellectual connection, shared purpose, or deep companionship. These couples may not touch often, yet their loyalty and commitment are unshakable. But for many, physical intimacy is the bridge between the emotional and the tangible. It's the moment where feelings take shape in the real world. Without it, they begin to wonder, am I still wanted? Am I still seen? Elliot and Sienna had been together for 7 years. When Sienna developed a chronic illness that caused pain during touch, their physical relationship halted almost overnight. At first, Elliot reassured her, it's okay, I'm here for you, no matter what. And he meant it. But as months turned into years, he found himself aching not for sex alone, but for closeness. The casual arm around her waist, the kiss on her shoulder while she cooked, the shared warmth on cold nights, those were gone. He began to feel like a polite roommate, not a partner. Sienna, sensing his withdrawal, felt guilty and defensive. They loved each other deeply, but love was now wrapped in layers of unspoken hurt. This is one of the hardest truths about physical intimacy in relationships. When it vanishes, the emotional distance often grows quietly, invisibly, until one day it feels irreversible. So can you fix it? Yes, but it requires both people to actively rebuild a new form of intimacy. Here's what that often means in real life. Finding non-sexual touch that feels safe and welcome. Creating moments of deliberate presence, shared meals without screens, slow walks, watching a sunset together. Using words to replace what touch once conveyed. It may not feel the same, but it can still be deeply nourishing. Imagine a fireplace in a home. When the flames are burning, the heat fills the room. When the fire dies, you can still stay warm, but now you need blankets, hot tea, perhaps the company of a friend by your side. It's not the same kind of warmth, but it can still keep you alive. In some cultures, physical intimacy is not a central component of marriage. Partnership is seen through the lens of duty, family structure, and social stability. Touch may be minimal, yet the union is strong. But in cultures where love is expected to fulfill emotional, sexual, and personal needs all at once, the absence of physical connection is felt more acutely. Studies in relationship psychology suggest that couples who maintain consistent physical affection, even small gestures, tend to report higher satisfaction. Interestingly, it's not just about sexual intimacy. Holding hands, cuddling, and even playful physicality trigger bonding chemicals in the brain. Without them, partners must work harder to maintain that same chemical and emotional closeness. I remember speaking to a man named Daniel who hadn't touched his wife in 3 years. When I asked why, he said quietly, I'm afraid she doesn't want me anymore. When I spoke to his wife later, she said, I thought he didn't want me. Both were waiting for the other to make the first move. And in that waiting, the years passed. The danger here isn't just the loss of intimacy, it's the spiral of assumption. When you stop touching, you often stop talking about why. And in the silence, stories form. Stories that may not be true, but feel true. So if you're in a relationship without physical intimacy, ask yourself and your partner 3 things. Do we both want to rebuild it? If we can't rebuild it physically, how else can we create closeness? Are we willing to keep choosing each other, even in a new form? Because love without touch can survive, but love without effort cannot. And here's the secret sometimes. Finding a new way to connect doesn't just save a relationship. It can transform it into something deeper, more intentional, and surprisingly resilient. Every relationship is a living thing. It breathes in the moments you share, feeds on the time and energy you give, and grows in the soil of mutual care. When physical intimacy is absent, that living thing doesn't automatically die, but it changes. It may grow slower. It may need different nourishment. And yes, it may need more conscious tending. We often underestimate how much our bodies speak for us. The resting of a head on a shoulder, the tracing of fingers along a forearm, the spontaneous hug in the kitchen while waiting for the coffee to brew. These are the punctuation marks of love, the commas, exclamation points, and ellipses in the story of us. When they're gone, the story can still be told, but it risks feeling flat, like a letter without pauses or emphasis. Some people live decades without physical intimacy from their partner and still call their relationship good. For them, the bond is rooted in loyalty, shared history, and emotional partnership. Their connection is expressed in acts of service, in humor, in the raising of children, or the pursuit of common dreams. But for others, the absence of touch feels like living in a house with no windows. Safe, yes. Sheltered, yes. But missing that sense of open air, missing the sunlight on your face. I once spoke to a woman named Claire, married for 22 years. Her husband was affectionate for the first decade, holding her hand everywhere they went. But over time, the touches faded, replaced by a polite distance. She told me, "I don't miss the sex as much as I miss being reached for. I miss knowing his body still seeks mine." It wasn't about lust. It was about recognition, the silent acknowledgement that she was still the one. And that's the crux of it. Physical intimacy is not only about physical pleasure. It's about affirmation. It's about knowing you are wanted in the most human, instinctive way possible. Without it, some partners begin to question not just the relationship, but themselves. Can a relationship survive without it? Yes. But can it thrive? That depends. Here's what couples who survive and even thrive without physical intimacy often share in common. They talk openly about it. They don't let it become the elephant in the room. They name it, and they explore the reasons together. They create replacement rituals. Maybe it's nightly tea on the couch, morning walks, or reading aloud to each other. Small acts repeated that still create closeness. They release the fantasy of what should be. Instead of measuring their love against a cultural template, they build their own definition. They don't confuse lack of intimacy with lack of love. They consciously remind each other and themselves that affection can take many forms. But even with these tools, you must be honest. If the absence of touch leaves you feeling chronically lonely, resentful, or unseen, it will erode you. And no amount of loyalty or shared history can replace your core needs. That's not selfishness. That's self-preservation. The truth is, there is no universal answer to whether a relationship can survive without physical intimacy. Some will endure beautifully. Others will wither quietly. The difference is not in the absence of intimacy itself, but in how both people respond to that absence. Think of a garden. If one kind of flower can no longer bloom, you can plant others. If the roses won't grow, maybe the lavender will. The garden can still be alive, still be beautiful, but only if you keep planting, keep tending, keep caring. Leave it untended, and nothing survives. Love is not defined by one dimension. It's not defined by one act, one expression, one channel of connection. It is the sum of countless moments, some loud and passionate, others quiet and unspoken. Without physical intimacy, those quiet moments must work harder. They must be intentional. They must be frequent. They must be real. So can your relationship survive without physical intimacy? Only you and your partner can answer that. But remember, this survival is not the same as living. And love deserves more than survival. It deserves to breathe, to grow, to be felt in every way you and your partner can give it. Because even if the body cannot always touch, the heart still can.